Thank you, Jill. Well, it's a great privilege to be here with you all, although you'll be pleased to know that Christian Aid has a very strong carbon budget, so I've had to not travel somewhere else in order to be here this weekend over my annual budget. I want to reflect as an organisation that's been working with faith groups, with the Church of England, with the Methodist Church, on divestment in terms of what our experience has been. So perhaps experience perhaps a little bit more akin to you as investors or potential investors. And also Christian Aid itself wants to be divesting more fully as well. So some of the issues that we've been reflecting on, I want to start, as you would expect from a church-based or a faith-based organisation, to start theologically. And it's very interesting that in the Church of England, when they made their announcement just in May, in the policy statement that came from the Ethical Investment Advisory Group, had quite a few paragraphs that placed their decision within a very strong theological or religious framework. Psalm 24 says, "The earth is the Lord's and all within it." So reminding ourselves, and obviously we've heard that much more recently from Pope Francis, placing ourselves very much in that position. And it's very interesting for me that the Church of England had that very explicit theological reflection on climate change. If fossil fuel overuse is harming creation, then we need to speak and act, they said. The Christian tradition of withholding investments is not new. There are many religious organisations that don't invest in gambling, in alcohol, in arms control, etc., in arms use, etc. So it's simply a question of adding fossil fuel abuse onto that list. And that is part of the growing movement that Bill 350 and a whole load of others have actually helped to engineer. For Christian Aid as well, our theology, rooted in the voices of our partners in the South, tells us very strongly, hear the cry of the poor that around the world is experiencing the reality and impact of climate change now. And many of our partners are much more challenging, perhaps, than we might be. So this movement isn't just about activism, not that there's anything wrong with activism, but it is rooted in an important and deep reflection. And I guess it's about each of us, therefore, knowing what our contribution is. It's our niche, it's our space. For Christian Aid, being able to engage in that theological space is an important contribution that we make. And we need to own that space and use it wisely. I know in Ireland, perhaps the role of churches is not as important as it once was. There's something about perhaps quite negative contributions about being a Christian speaking out about issues. Well, I think perhaps, instead of this being about a label of abuse and exploitation of people, actually Christians need to be speaking out loud and clearly to say we're not standing up for abuse and exploitation of our planet. It's a complex and challenging issue too. We're an international organisation, so we know that travel is a necessity. We recognise there are inherent challenges and contradictions in any position. And I think this is really quite a challenge. We had a discussion about this just before. If we wait until we're absolutely pure, then time will pass us by. We have to recognise the contradictions, we have to recognise the inherent difficulties of our positions, but we also have to know, well, we're trying, we're keeping going on that direction of travel. So don't just wait until everything is perfect and you're pure before you do anything, otherwise nothing would ever get done. We have to start to redress the balance. Imperfect action is better than no action. But the reality is that our solution here, as Bill alluded to in the last session, the solution is a systemic one, not just an individual one. He talked about people flying for conferences and all that kind of stuff. Well, there's a lot more that we can all do to make our technology better, to enable us to not have to meet quite so often, but to engage face-to-face, we know that when you do get people together, particularly if they're people who are activists and who are inspired by one another, then that is a good use of limited resources. And also for us as an organisation, we have to balance those risks around people's pensions. So the discussions that we're having with our own pension providers about real divestment from that pension pot is something we're having to balance with our own fiduciary duty to our own staff in terms of the pension that they might inherit. And of course, we have an obligation to maximise donations from our supporters, but there is something within charity law within the UK that enables you to do that in the sense of, or in the light of your own organisational values. One of the big debates is about, do you engage or do you not? You know, this sense of divestment or civil disobedience versus influence, if you like. The experience that we've had with the Church of England in particular is a very nuanced relationship between activism and sort of insider engagement. Working with the Ethical Investment Advisory Committee, helping them to work through the challenging issues, has happened sometimes at the same time as serious engagement with synod votes and that kind of thing that the Church has sometimes felt quite uncomfortable with. As Bill referred to before, this is not the only tool in your toolkit. It is about looking at what you have got available in your toolkit and being able to work with it. And we've done both internal, if you like, or insider engagement, as well as the external one. But the Church of England's response, in my view, was a really good start. It could go further, but, you know, let's take a first step as a really important step. But that decision was strengthened by the understanding and seeing the sort of engagement and civil disobedience, if you like, and views of its own supporters. But civil disobedience and engagement has to be, internal stuff, influencing, has to be meaningful and not just a smokescreen. So the Church of England was saying to us, we're going to divest with companies that have investments in coal and tar sands above 10%, absolutely, and for those other companies, we'll engage. And our challenge is, you have to make that engagement really meaningful. And that's one instance whereby, if you like, divestment, or perhaps the threat of divestment, strengthens your engagement, and at the same time, your engagement can strengthen the power of divestment. So you use those two tools in slightly different ways, but they're nonetheless both useful. One particular instance that we work with is an organisation called Share Action that's using questions at AGMs of big businesses throughout the UK. And Share Action work with a small number of people, they train them, they engage in asking questions at AGMs. They don't stand up and make a fuss, they don't stand up and give speeches, they ask questions, they operate within the rules. But they're very powerful because when you're in an AGM setting, there is somebody there that's going to bring that question. Sometimes civil disobedience, sometimes activism can easily be, I think we all have to wave our arms around at this point because we've all been so still for so long. Can we have the lights back on? Or maybe it's somebody's way of telling me that I've been going on for too long.
No, I didn't do that.
Thank you. My time is up. So my point is that sometimes it is very easy for us, if we're activists, to be disregarded. To be, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? You know, to be the sort of screamers. You know, you're just screaming tree huggers, you have no credibility. And it's really important that we use that civil disobedience space in the right way and to be as effective as possible. I was struck just last Wednesday, we had 8,000 people registered to visit their MPs at the Westminster, in the Westminster Parliament as part of the biggest ever climate lobby. It was very interesting actually to see how little media coverage we got. But one of the interesting things was MPs were forced to listen and forced to engage with their constituents. And we had lots of really creative engagement and lots of challenges. But at the heart of it was that in-depth conversation, looking their MPs in the eye and saying, I'm going to hold you accountable. In the Westminster Parliament, we've had a massive number of new MPs joining us for one reason or another, and it was really vital that climate change was put on the agenda for those people. Now, it wasn't the end of the day, because it wasn't the end of the struggle. There's going to be more engagements before Paris. But it was really important for us to work in that way, in a coalition of more than 100 different organisations, bringing a variety of different skills and different insights, ranging from, church leaders having photographs through to surfers with their surfboards. So I think for me, there's a real challenge for us about using the skills and resources and the niche that we have as wisely as possible. And for each of you, as potential investors, certainly if you've got pension funds, it's a really important time to act, and to act now. Thank you.